All right, we're going to get started. Buenos días a todos. Como dije anteriormente, mi nombre es Claudio Pincus y soy cofundador de CodeStream, la plataforma de colaboración para desarrolladores. Y esta presentación tendrá dos partes. Una es la explicación del uso de CodeStream en el trabajo de desarrollador, y después será la demostración del programa en manos de Dave Hirsch. So I'm just doing a little bit of translating back and forth, Dave. This is the first part of the presentation where I'm talking about how CodeStream works, and then you're going to take it over and show it to the participants.
All righty.
So, el primer punto es que CodeStream ha sido diseñado para el trabajo remoto. Y en este mundo tan complejo, en este momento, en donde todos somos trabajadores remotos, una herramienta como CodeStream puede ser muy importante. Hablaremos de qué se trata CodeStream y para qué se usa, y finalizaremos con las oportunidades en esta colaboración entre CodeStream y CodersLink. Sabemos ya que el trabajo remoto es la nueva norma en este momento. Todos los que trabajábamos en una oficina anteriormente, estamos en este momento trabajando desde nuestras casas. Esto fue una tendencia que ya existía anteriormente, pero ahora con la situación actual se está acelerando. Sabemos que hay muchos beneficios que vienen del trabajo remoto, entre los que se encuentran la flexibilidad, la reducción del tráfico en las ciudades, menos polución, más tiempo libre, más tiempo con la familia. Pero también hay un precio a pagar, con cierto distanciamiento social, menos espontaneidad y menos interacciones síncronas y muchas más asíncronas. Es decir, acercarse al escritorio de un colega y preguntarle algo se transformó en algo más complejo. Para resolver este tema hay que utilizar mejores herramientas. La misión de CodeStream es muy sencilla. Es mejorar el desempeño de los equipos de desarrollo mediante la comunicación, la integración y la transparencia. Esas tres palabras, comunicación, integración y transparencia, serán muy obvias cuando les presentemos el producto y entenderán por qué nosotros hemos creado esta herramienta para el trabajo remoto. En el caso de la comunicación, CodeStream es una herramienta que trabaja dentro del editor como VS Code o Visual Studio o los editores de JetBrains o Atom para integrarse con las herramientas de comunicación que todos ya utilizan como Slack o Microsoft Teams o email. Y todo esto funciona como parte natural del trabajo que se realiza dentro de CodeStream. También estamos integrados con más de 20 herramientas distintas que utilizan normalmente los desarrolladores en su trabajo cotidiano. En cuanto a transparencia, permitimos que cada miembro del equipo o sus managers puedan ver exactamente qué está trabajando cada uno. Como verán también, una consecuencia del uso de CodeStream es que el código se documenta en forma automática. Así que ya verán en la demostración cómo todo esto se integra. Antes de empezar con la demostración, quisiera hacer algunas preguntas para entender la composición del grupo. We're going to do a little bit of polling here. I'm going to start a poll and I'm going to ask you all, before Dave gets started, to answer the following few questions. So, ahora deben ver ustedes algunas preguntas que nos permitirán entender un poco mejor cómo orientar la demostración. Si pueden responderlas en este momento, se los agradeceríamos. Es el panel que dice CodersLink Development Survey y estará abierto hasta que cerremos la sesión de la demostración. Así que contesten lo que puedan. Dave, we're already starting the polling, asking people to answer a few questions, helping us shape the direction. So what I'm going to do is, on that basis, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to you. remember that the format will be, we speak a little bit, then we pause, we see if there is any need for translation, and then we resume. Vamos a hacer la demostración con pausas para poder traducir en caso de que haya preguntas. Todos pueden hacer sus preguntas a través del uso de Zoom en el Q&A en cualquier momento y las responderemos a medida que vayamos avanzando.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. What we're going to do today is I'm first going to talk to you about the basics of CodeStream. What is CodeStream, how to install it, sign up, get a team created. And then once we cover the basics, we'll talk a little bit about how CodeStream fits into some different scenarios you guys have. Some of you have been placed on teams and have been there for a while. We'll talk about how to use CodeStream in those scenarios. Some of you are new to teams. We'll talk about that. And lastly, some of you haven't been placed on teams, and we'll talk about how you can familiarize yourself with CodeStream in that situation. And of course, please interrupt at any time with questions. You can type them in. I'll get the heads up about them. And of course, if you need me to slow down, let me know that as well. So first and foremost, CodeStream is a developer collaboration platform. We make it very easy for developers to both discuss and review code. And we allow you to discuss code anywhere along the timeline of the code's lifespan. So you could ask a question about code that you just typed into your editor and haven't even saved yet. You can get feedback on a work in progress. You can have completed work reviewed. And you can ask questions about or highlight problems in code that was merged in weeks, months, or even years ago. And during the course of this demo, we'll show some of these scenarios. So now I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. All right, hopefully everybody can see my screen now. What you're looking at is Visual Studio Code. So CodeStream is a cloud-based service, but we live as an extension into popular IDEs. And we have extensions for VS Code, Visual Studio, Atom, and the entire suite of JetBrains IDEs, including IntelliJ, Android Studio, WebStorm, the whole suite. So the very first step is to install the CodeStream extension. And I'm going to show you this in VS Code, but the paradigm is the same across all of the IDEs. So I'm going to click on extensions in the VS Code activity bar, and I'm just going to search for CodeStream and just simply click install. Now, in some cases, you might be asked to reload your IDE after installing it. Otherwise, you'll see the CodeStream extension appear in your status bar. Just click it and it will pop up. In this case, I was already signed up, but I'm going to go ahead and sign out and show you what it looks like from a first user experience. So normally after you install the extension, this is the page you will see, and your first decision is to decide whether you are going to be joining somebody else's team or whether you're creating a team. Chances are you're all going to be creating teams because you're going to be the first person to embrace CodeStream at whatever company you've been placed at. On the off chance that you were invited to CodeStream, you would select Find Your Team. So we'll go ahead and create a team. Now, I'm putting in a company name here, and for you folks, what you'll probably do here is you'll put in the company name of the company that you've been placed at, because the idea here is that even though you're creating this team and you're kind of the entry point for CodeStream into this company, at some point, if things go well, that company will sort of take ownership of this team. So use the client company's name here. And then what you'll be asked to do is confirm your email address. So let me go get the code from the email.
Mientras Dave busca su email, si tienen alguna pregunta mientras tanto, ya sea en inglés o en español, pueden ir al Q&A, el botón de abajo, y escribir lo que no les quede claro. Si es en español, yo lo traduciré al inglés para Dave.
So I received an email with a 6-digit code that I can just paste in here. Then I can give the team a name, and this would sort of be, the name of whatever team you're on in the organization that you've been placed at. Maybe you're part of the mobile team, or you're part of the front end UI team, or the back end server team, whatever the case may be. Or if it's a small company, maybe you're just part of the development team. Kind of up to you. With that, you're all done, and you're in the product, and you can see the first thing you'll see is a getting started guide. It'll walk you through some key steps to familiarizing yourself with CodeStream. That being said, you have me instead, so I'm going to sign back out and into a different account where I've already got a lot of stuff set up for the purposes of this demo. So as I mentioned, CodeStream is fundamentally a code discussion tool. Now today you would normally discuss code by copying and pasting it into a Slack channel. And that's especially true today with everybody being remote and there's no opportunity to walk down the hall and tap another developer on the shoulder. And Slack is great. We use Slack every day ourselves, but it's not necessarily the greatest thing for discussing code. There's a lot of friction in that process. So imagine if today I wanted to discuss this block of code, I would copy and paste, head over to Slack, paste it in a channel there, and then I'd have to recreate all of the context. So my teammates know what repo I'm talking about, what file, what line number. Maybe I even have to do a git blame to know who wrote this code so I know who do I mention over Slack. And then once I have that conversation on Slack, within minutes, you know how this goes, it scrolls off the top of the channel history and it's effectively lost forever. There's no lasting value to the conversation, out of sight, out of mind. So instead, I'll show you how this works on CodeStream. And if you've ever commented on a Google Doc, this paradigm will feel very familiar to you. Simply highlight the code, click on the comment icon, and ask your question. Before I submit this, I'll point out that I can also share this out to Slack. The first time you do this, you'll be asked to authenticate with Slack, and then from there you can pick any of your channels, and I will, or direct messages. In this case, I'll share it out to the development channel in our Slack workspace. So now you can see that we have a discussion connected to a block of code, and whenever I mouse over that, it highlights the corresponding block of code. Now, CodeStream, we call this a code mark. Twitter has tweets, CodeStream has code marks. So now that we've created that discussion, how do my teammates find out about it? And there's a few ways. The first and foremost, to the extent that those teammates are on CodeStream, they would find out via the activity feed. And this works just the same way that a Facebook feed does. All the new stuff, whether it's new code marks or replies to existing code marks, flows through this activity feed. And there'd be a little blue badge here letting you know that there was new messages, and you could come in and click on the new stuff, and you could participate right from within your IDE.
Hey, Dave, yep. There is a question that we can probably answer live, and it is, besides signing up that way, can you authenticate with GitHub?
Yes, absolutely. And we can go back to that a little later, but whenever you hit that create an account page where I put in my email address and password and all that, towards the bottom, there was a button to sign up with GitHub. And so that's a great way if you want to have one less password to remember.
Cool.
So I just showed here how you can participate in the discussion right here from within the IDE. If I had mentioned somebody, which you can do just like on any other site, that person would get an email notification, and they would get notified via email, and they can reply to that email, and the reply will come back directly into CodeStream. In this case, I also shared out to Slack, so my teammates would also get notified via Slack. And a little bit later in this demo, we'll talk, I'll show in more detail how teammates can participate in conversations from Slack. Now I want to show you a few other ways to create code marks. In this case, I highlighted code and then clicked on the icon after doing so. You can also, again, just like Google Docs, hover up and down in this gutter if you want to comment on a single line. But you also have the ability to highlight a block of code and then either select comment from the light bulb menu, or you can right click and select comment, add comment from the context menu. And both of those options are great because they work even when the CodeStream pane is closed. So I can initiate a discussion even while CodeStream isn't in view. And that may often be the case. Sometimes you want to sort of maximize the real estate in your IDE for code, and we totally understand that. So you can initiate a conversation even when the CodeStream pane is closed. And I should also note that when the CodeStream pane is closed, you can also tell where there were discussions that took place in the past. So you can see these icons that we leave in a special gutter. They let you know that there was a discussion there, and you can hover over it and open up that discussion and review that past discussion. And that's important because CodeStream 1 makes it very, very easy to discuss code. And hopefully that was clear from the example I just gave. Highlight the code, ask your question. But the other benefit of CodeStream is that we save all of these discussions connected to the code that they refer to. So imagine that a new developer joins your team 6 months from now, and they come in and they're going to work on this part of the code. They'll see that there was a discussion. They'll come in and review that discussion. That will help them understand why the code looks the way it does today, and ultimately, hopefully make their job easier. And that could also just be you taking on a different part of the code base, or you simply trying to fix a bug in somebody else's code. You get the benefit of working from an annotated code base. So I'll pause there just for a second to see if there's any questions.
Just a couple of things I'm going to say in Spanish. Si tienen preguntas o algo que no entienden, por favor utilicen el Q&A. Como ven, hay algunas preguntas que ya hemos respondido. Y segundo, aquel que no haya votado en el Developer Survey todavía puede hacerlo. No lo cerraremos hasta el final, pero nos servirá bastante para poder después dirigir las respuestas hacia las preguntas que hemos hecho. Así que si no han completado la encuesta, por favor, háganlo. Muchas gracias. So I was just mentioning, Dave, that people still have time to complete the survey. They're doing it as we speak. And we can go back to the demo.
All right. There was a question about whether, when we were looking at this comment, if this was a screenshot. And if I understand the question correctly, I assume you're asking if this code block here is a screenshot. It is not. It is actual text. It's the actual code itself. That was based on the code when the question was asked. So one thing I want to point out here is that obviously the way that CodeStream provides this long-term value is by making sure that this discussion always remains connected to this block of code. As you might imagine, the source file is going to change a million different ways starting tomorrow. So for example, I could come in and put a whole bunch of lines of local changes above that block of code. And what you'll see is that the discussion moves right along with that block of code. And that will even be the case. I could highlight this block of code, cut it, and paste it at the bottom of the file, and that discussion will move right along with it. And that's critically important because the only way that this has long-term value is if it's surfaced contextually. That means when somebody's going to work on this code, they see that discussion. Now, another sort of question I'd like to preemptively answer is that a lot of people ask, does CodeStream work with branches? Does it work across branches? And the short answer is yes, but more specifically, we're somewhat agnostic to branches. So you can see here in this discussion, we do point out what branch this was created against, in this case, CR3, and even the commit hash of the code at that point. But what CodeStream will do is, in this sort of current file view, we will show all discussions related to this source file, stout.js, regardless of what branch they were created against. So if you're at a company where everybody does their work on feature branches, it's quite possible that the discussion you're looking at, created by a teammate, was created against code that was on his or her feature branch, But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not related to what you're doing with your work. It could be against code that matches what you've got, so it's very related to what you're doing. But it could also be against code that doesn't match what you have locally. And in those cases, we point it out to you. And I'll give you an example of that. So say I've got a bug to fix or a new feature to code up, and I'm writing some new code. Great example. So, I write out a quick function or a new method or something like that, and I'm struggling with it, and I want to get some help. So today I could copy and paste and head over to Slack and have to recreate all the context. Alternatively, maybe I save it, commit it, push it, and issue a pull request, but that seems like a lot of effort just to get a question asked. But with CodeStream, I can just highlight that brand new line of code that I haven't even saved yet and ask my question. Help, and I'll share that out to Slack again. So super simple. Now, the question maybe some of you are asking now is, well, what does this look like for my teammates who don't have this code? So we're just gonna kind of fake that situation by getting rid of it. And we'll see what this looks like from a teammate's perspective. So you can see that line of code is included in the discussion, and CodeStream recognizes that my version of the code doesn't match what my teammate's version of the code looks like. So we note that here. And you'll see that we provide some additional options. So I can apply that line of code directly into my buffer, or I could do a diff to compare my teammate's code to what I've got. And the reason I like to show this example is that it highlights the fact that you can discuss code at the very earliest stages of the development process. And that's ultimately what CodeStream is all about, because if you get developers talking more frequently, and especially earlier in the process, issues get identified earlier when it's much easier to make changes. Whereas if you wait until the, later in the development cycle, people are much more resistant to change because it typically means there's a lot of work to undo at that point. All right, let me just close this. Okay, now let's talk specifically about those of you that have been already placed at employer. So many of you have been placed with the client. You're already part of a team. Maybe you're sort of well situated at this point. So what are the benefits of CodeStream that you can bring to that team, and how can you best introduce CodeStream to the team? So as you've hopefully seen, with the ability to asynchronously discuss code right inside your IDE, CodeStream is particularly well suited for remote development teams. Excuse me. And since every development team is now a remote team, for better or worse, this presents a great opportunity for you to help the teams you work with by introducing CodeStream. As I mentioned before, we're no longer in an environment where you can walk down the hall and tap somebody on the shoulder. So easier communication is critical, and copying and pasting into Slack is definitely not easier. So we've talked about how CodeStream makes discussing code very easy, but CodeStream also makes it easier to review code, which is really probably the most common area of code discussion these days. So I'd like to show you how we do code reviews on CodeStream. Let me switch over to a different file here. So at any point during the development process, I can request the code review. And what you'll see here is that CodeStream basically, let me make a little bit more room here. There we go. CodeStream basically packages up the current state of my editor. So if you look down here, you can see I've got some commits that have been pushed. I've got some local commits that haven't been pushed yet. And I've got work that has only been saved or maybe staged but not committed. So I've got work in sort of different degrees of being in progress, and any and all of that is eligible to be included in my code review. So I can simply check or uncheck boxes as I see fit, and of course I can still share to Slack. And here's a summary of the files that are included in this change set. And all I need to do is pick a reviewer. And then under normal circumstances, CodeStream will actually suggest some reviewers to you based on whose code you're touching here. And beyond that, you can maybe tweak the title a bit or add a description if you want. So I could say, hey, here's my first cut. Have a look, please. Can't type today. And that's really it. Just, a few clicks, and now you've got a code review. And of course, teammates will get notified here in the activity feed or via email or via Slack. So the key thing to point out there is that I was able to submit a code review right inside my IDE with just a few clicks, and I didn't need to commit anything. I didn't need to push anything. I didn't need to leave my IDE to go to GitHub and issue a pull request. So from the standpoint of the code author requesting a code review, super simple process. But now let's look at it from the standpoint of the person doing a review. So they can click on it, they'll see all the summary information about the review, the repository, the branch, who requested it, and then they can simply click on a file and start reviewing the changes. And the key thing to point out here is that I didn't need to set aside whatever I was working on at the moment. I didn't need to change branches. I didn't need to pull any changes. And importantly, I didn't need to leave my editor. So here I am reviewing code from a teammate, including code that hasn't even been committed yet. And it's important for me to point out that, so I'm reviewing changes here in a file called agent.js. So I may have been working in that file as well, and I may in fact have it open in my editor here. And so me reviewing this diff has nothing to do with my version of agent.js, where this is completely, doesn't interfere at all, non-destructive. CodeStream sends this entire diff over the wire, so I can review the code just as if my teammate were looking at a diff up on GitHub. And so I can look over the changes and comment on them just like I was creating a code mark. I can even mark, excuse me, I can mark this as a change request, which sort of, signals to the developer that, hey, this is something that you need to change before the review is going to get approved. And what you'll see is that change request gets added up here, and then the details are added to the reviews thread. We can continue the discussion. Now, one thing I will want to point out, especially in comparison to doing a code review on GitHub, is that on CodeStream, you have the full file context. So not just the 4 lines that changed and 2 on either side, you have the entire file here. So you can really understand how this change fits into the file. But that also allows you to comment, for example, down here. I could add a comment on this block of code and say, hey, you forgot to make a change here, or hey, here's a good example of something. And I can even go to a different file completely unrelated to this change set, or maybe even a different repo and say, hey, here's an example of how you should have done things. And you can see that gets added to the code review. Now, we can go back and forth. I add comments, my teammate addresses the change requests, and ultimately I either can approve or reject the code review. Now you'll see here, normally this is a green thumbs up button to approve, but in this case, since there's one outstanding change request, we want to let you know that, hey, this might not be ready to approve yet. So eventually the developer completes the change requests. You'll see we get notified about that down here. And of course, now I can approve the code review. So hopefully you can see from that we make the process of doing a code review super, super simple from both the standpoint of the person requesting the review and the person doing the review. And you can certainly use this as a replacement for the formal code review you do at the end of the development cycle. So if you use GitHub pull requests, maybe you do the review as part of that PR. So instead, you could do a CodeStream code review and have all the simplicity and flexibility of doing it in your IDE. And then once the code has been reviewed, you can go issue your PR and life continues on as normal. But what our hope is that since these are so simple and so frictionless, that you'll start doing code reviews earlier in the process and more frequently. And that's why that ability to include uncommitted code is so important, because we want you to be able to do code reviews on work in progress. And in that context, maybe even the word code review isn't right. Maybe you just, or effectively just want somebody to have a look at what you're doing and make sure you're on the right track. So for example, if your company has a 2-week development sprint and 3 days into the sprint, you've got, sort of a framework of the work ready to go, request the review, have somebody take a look. And the benefit of that is that, one, it's easier on your teammates because, these are smaller, more digestible, less burdensome code reviews. but also it allows you to identify, discuss, and resolve issues much earlier in the process, so that by the time you get to that final formal code review, hopefully it's much less painful because all of the big issues have already been dealt with. So
Oh,
let me
Dave,
pause. Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you with, once again, a suggestion. If anybody has any questions, please type them into Q&A. In the meantime, there are 3 questions that
Okay.
I'd like to bring up. The first one is from Esteban from Monterrey. His question is, how are the comments stored into a Visual Studio solution? Is it stored into an XML or other separate file?
So the answer there is that even though we live as an extension into the IDE, CodeStream is really a cloud service. So all of these discussions are saved in CodeStream's cloud. And with each discussion, we save some metadata, the repository, the commit hash, the file name, the line and column ranges. So that way, we know how to connect the discussion to the block of code. And of course, we also offer an on-prem solution. So if you're not comfortable, if your company has a lot of InfoSec requirements, and you don't want code being stored up in the CodeStream cloud, you can use CodeStream's on-prem service, which is just a Dockerized version of our cloud service, and it's very simple and easy to set up.
Excellent. So the other 2 questions, I believe that they were answered, but we can kind of come back to those answers. One of them is, are we seeing live when you're actually seeing the code mark and the deletion of code and so forth? And the other, if the code has changed, what happens? I know you demoed that, but maybe you just can stress the answers.
Right. Yeah, so everything is live. I talked about this as being an asynchronous form of communication. And I say that just because it feels and is perceived as being less interruptive and disruptive as sort of blasting somebody on Slack constantly. But it is real time. If a teammate and I were both in this conversation, typing back and forth, it would be real time messaging, just as if you were texting or slacking each other for sure. And then in terms of what happens if the code changes, we did show that example. If the code that is here, so this code will not change. This is the code as it looked like at the time the question was asked. And if this doesn't match what I have locally, CodeStream will point that out and allow you to do a diff. And that can happen at any time. So right now the code does match, but I could come in tomorrow and start making local changes, which result in things no longer matching. And CodeStream will recognize it and note that down here and provide those compare and apply buttons.
One more question that came in from Carlos. Is this extension like pair programming, or can you share live code screen? So is this like pair programming, Dave?
Not really. So for example, you may be thinking about VS Code's live share or other pair programming tools. And that's really a tool for letting somebody, into your editor directly. So you're both editing the same file effectively. And CodeStream isn't really that. It's definitely a bit more asynchronous. So while things can happen in real time, you're not bringing somebody into your editor. Maybe a good analogy, I'll let you decide, is imagine you're in Slack chatting back and forth, and sometimes you kind of escalate that to a video chat. Maybe that's kind of a good analogy between discussing code in CodeStream and sort of live pair programming. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, let's continue.
All right. So the other thing I want to show in this context is what we call live view. So being a remote generally means that there's less communication among the team, less visibility into what people are working on. This is particularly true for teams that are newly remote, which is the case for a lot of teams right now. So CodeStream's live view helps solve that problem. So if you come over here to the team tab, you'll see who's on your team, and of course the ability to invite other people by adding their email address. What we will also see here is what everybody is working on. And so I can see here that my teammate Larry is working in these two repos, and he's checked out to these branches, and I can even see what he's been working on. And if you hover over a line, it'll show you the actual files that he's got open in his editor. And what's nice, especially in this example, is that that yellow or the orange kind of warning symbol lets me know that, you know, my teammate is making changes into a file that I'm also making changes to. So you have the potential for a merge conflict. And so think about the power of that, right? Because today you usually find out about merge conflicts when you're trying to do the merge, when it's too late, and then you've got a big mess to try to unwind. Well, with CodeStream, we let you know as soon as there's a possibility of a merge conflict. So if I'm making some changes in extensions.js and then Claudio starts to make changes in that same file, you know, this orange warning is going to show up here. It's going to show up here. And in fact, when I'm in one of the files, it'll show up here as well. So we make it clear that, hey, somebody might be about to step on your code, and you might want to talk to them and prevent that merge conflict from ever happening in the first place. So it's very powerful, not just helping you prevent merge conflicts, but just kind of creating some awareness of what everybody is working on. And in, you know, today's exclusively remote world, that's a very powerful thing. Now, that being said, maybe there are instances where you don't want people to see what you're working on, and you can just come here and click on that, and you can see that hides, you know, all of your work. So kind of up to you as to whether or not you want to participate, but it's a pretty compelling feature, and you know, I think in today's world it's especially powerful. And you can even think about it from the standpoint of a team lead or a manager, maybe. You know, the benefits from having visibility into what the team is working on and what they have going on. And, you know, when you're thinking about trying to get CodeStream into an organization, the team leads and managers may be good champions to help you with that cause. And this is a feature that's particularly, you know, impressive to them. All right. Are there any other questions before I move on, Claudia?
No additional questions. I'm in the meantime typing some of the answers in Spanish. Carlos seems to be bringing up some additional ones, and we can answer that in English, and I will also answer in Spanish by typing the answers into the chat group. The question from Carlos was, is this code JavaScript? And I think the answer is that we are language agnostic. We work on any programming language. Funciona para cualquier lenguaje de programación, no solamente JavaScript. And then he has another question that is more generic, says, what advantages does this system have? And you can take that on, Dave, and I can come back to it in Spanish as well.
What advantages does it have? I guess the part.
And I think that was probably in the context of pair programming.
Right. Gotcha. Well, that's a broad question. You know, fundamentally, it allows you to more easily discuss code, and communication is at the core of a more efficient development team. Now, pair programming is awesome, but it's also something that most developers don't want to sort of have ongoing throughout the course of their day. You know, if Claudio and I wanted to pair program, you know, we'd kind of reach out to each other. Hey, Claudio, are you free now? Can we set up a live share session? You know, no, how about this afternoon? Or, you know, we've been doing it for half an hour, now I got to go do something else. So, you know, it's very sort of interruptive, requires you to kind of set aside everything else you're doing to focus on, you know, this pair programming initiative. Where with CodeStream, you know, we're not necessarily looking to replace that, but we provide a more synchronous opportunity to, you know, I can ask Claudio a question, I can ask him to review some code, whatever the case may be, and Claudio can jump on that right now and provide me feedback instantaneously, or Claudio can get to that whenever the opportunity is right for him. So I think CodeStream is more suited to kind of ongoing collaboration, whereas pair programming, you know, sort of only works in specific instances, you know, when people's schedules match up, when they're willing to allocate time, when they're willing to set aside what they're working on in a pretty significant way. So I think they play together well. I don't think one is necessarily a replacement for the other.
I'm just going to answer in Spanish. It's going to be a little bit of your translation, but I'm going to add some other little details. La diferencia esencial entre pair programming y CodeStream es que el trabajo en CodeStream es fundamentalmente asíncrono. No hace falta trabajar al mismo tiempo en el mismo código ni nada por el estilo. Pero hay dos ventajas adicionales que son importantes. Una es que esta es una manera de documentar el código en forma permanente, por lo cual estas conversaciones que van teniendo se transforman en documentación que ayudan al próximo programador que entra al sistema a entender qué sucedió y por qué sucedió. La segunda ventaja esencial es que esto también se transforma en la fuente de la verdad al conectarlo con todos los otros sistemas que todos los programadores utilizan, como los issue trackers, Jira, Trello, etc. Y también traen, por ejemplo, los pull requests de GitHub o GitLab. So I'm just going to comment on this for you, Dave. One of the things that we didn't touch on is the fact that if you have PRs and you like to see them in context, you can just turn on the PR toggle switch and you'll be able to bring those into your IDE in the context of CodeStream. Y ahí ven cómo entran los comentarios de los pull requests a CodeStream en forma automática.
Yeah, so I'm showing that right here on the screen now. So you can see that comments from pull requests are being displayed right alongside the blocks of code they refer to. And the idea here is that, these are meaningful additions to your team's knowledge base, much in the way code marks are created within CodeStream. And, that same example of a new developer joining the team, before they go working on this code, they'll see there were pull requests and discussions related to this code that'll help them understand the code, make their job easier.
There are another couple of questions from Carlos in Spanish, so I'm just going to touch on them. Can you integrate with a development IDE such as Delphi X E10 or .NET 2012? And the answer for now is we continue to add support for many different IDEs over time, but those are not currently supported. Así que en este momento no tenemos soporte para esos editores, pero seguimos agregando soporte a editores todo el tiempo. And the next question is, Dave, if he understands correctly, this is like having a conversation between developers that were present and looking at the comments and commits, and they just keep adding information to the project. And I think that that description is generally right.
Yeah, that sounds correct. And one thing I should point out here is, so we've been mostly focusing on this sort of current file view of things, which is kind of like the Google Docs view. So you can see you scroll up and down in the file and the comments scroll up right along with it. And we've touched upon the activity feed, which is how you find out about new stuff. But I also want to point out the sort of filter and search tab, this is sort of a view of everything that's been created by your team. So all the code reviews, all the discussions, and you can do keyword search here. You can filter to see, everything assigned to you, everything you've created. You can filter by tags and repo and branches. So it's a powerful way to sort of explore the knowledge base however you see fit. The most important one is this contextual one, because this is how you're going to find out about stuff immediately relevant to, what you're about to work on. But you do have the ability to kind of explore and search and filter and slice and dice. All right, should I go ahead and move on, Claudia?
Yeah, we have about 15 minutes left. Nos quedan 15 minutos en los que tenemos la oportunidad de responder a más preguntas, y también tenemos alguna información adicional sobre esta nueva oportunidad para los desarrolladores de CodersLink en el contexto de nuestro nuevo acuerdo entre CodeStream y CodersLink. We have one more question. what programming language are we using? And the answer is many, but go ahead, Dave.
I think primarily TypeScript and JavaScript, but because we, we're an extension into the IDEs, it's a bit dependent upon what languages a certain IDE requires for building their extensions. So for example, our extensions into the JetBrains IDEs are built in Kotlin. Okay, so moving on. So we've talked about those of you that have already been placed in teams and have maybe been there for a while. Maybe you've got a good relationship with the team and you're comfortable introducing a new tool. That's great. Feel free to show them CodeStream and suggest that they give it a shot and how it might help them. But we know that that probably isn't the case for many of you. Maybe you're brand new to the team. That's okay though. The ability to share to Slack or to Microsoft Teams gives you a more natural and subtle way to introduce CodeStream into the mix. So if you recall from my earlier examples, we shared some code marks out to Slack. Maybe it was a question about how a block of code works. You're trying to understand code written by somebody else, or maybe you just need help with some code you're writing. So if you bear with me, I'm going to sort of switch my screen share here and show you what it looks like on Slack and how you participate from Slack. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my Slack now. Let me know if I need to zoom in. But you can see here's that code review that I shared. Here's that code mark that we created, and here's the very first one we did. So you can see that these code marks displayed on Slack include all of the same information, the post, information about what file and repo it was in, of course, the code block itself. Then you've got some compelling options down here. One, if the code is hosted on GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket, you could open the code directly on that service. You can use the Open in IDE button to deep link directly into your editor. So CodeStream will open this file, scroll to this code block, and of course, open the CodeStream discussion to its right. But if there's enough information right here in Slack for you to answer the question, you can simply click View Discussion and Reply and add a reply from Slack. And this reply will go back to CodeStream. And what's important to note here, and you'll see here that now this thread includes all of the replies, including the ones from CodeStream and the ones from Slack. But it's important to point out here that even people on your team that haven't been added to CodeStream are able to participate in the discussion this way. So it's a very easy way for you to sort of introduce CodeStream into the mix without having to kind of force all the rest of your team to join, or even before they've even been invited to CodeStream. But you can see here, all this is kind of attributed to CodeStream. They'll know where it came from. And as they start to participate in these discussions from Slack, some of them may be like, wow, this would be really cool if I could do it from right inside my editor. And so they start joining the Slack team, or the CodeStream team. All right, let's switch back to VS Code. Bear with me 1 second.
While you do that, a reminder to everybody, we've already received all the answers to the survey, but I know that some of you may be signing up for CodeStream with your email address. It is important that you use the same email address you use for registering for the webinar, so we can match it and attribute it to the CodersLink opportunity. So use the same email address that you use for the webinar. Por favor, usen la misma dirección de mail que utilizaron para registrarse cuando entren a CodeStream. Gracias.
So there's one last product feature I'd like to show you. CodeStream also integrates with many of the popular issue tracking services, such as Jira, Trello, or GitHub. And this is another great way for you to benefit from CodeStream while also introducing it to your teammates. So maybe you see a bug in the code, or maybe there's some tech debt that you want to flag so it can be addressed later. Of course, you can highlight it and leave a comment about it. But what we find is that if you can put somebody's name on it, it tends to lead to accountability, which leads to things actually getting done. So we have a different type of code mark called an issue. And what you'll see here is not only can I create an issue and it put an assignee's name on it in a description, but I can also create an issue on one of these external services. So for example, if the company that you're working for uses tracks, you can create an issue in Jira directly from CodeStream connected to a block of code. So you'll see all my Jira projects are listed here. And I can pick the appropriate ticket type. I can pick an assignee from Jira, and this doesn't have to be somebody on CodeStream. In this case, since it's going to get shared out to Jira, there's probably no need to share it to Slack as well. And so you can see that now we have an issue connected to the code, and here's a link to the issue on Jira. And to sort of, I'll save the time from me having to switch the screen share again, but the one thing I want to point out is that if we were to look at this on Jira, it would look very similar to the way a code mark looked like on Slack. It would include the repo information, the code block, and importantly, it would include that little open in IDE link. So that just makes it very simple for the assignee to go straight to the code in their editor and get right to the work at hand.
Excellent, Dave. Thank you. There is another question from Carlos. He wants to know, can you make, comment, and approve a PR from CodeStream?
So right now the answer is no, but that is on our pretty short-term roadmap. So I showed you that code review functionality, and because today you tend to think of code review and pull requests, you know, they go hand in hand. But our hope is that you'll start doing the code review part on CodeStream. And, you know, we're sort of collecting user feedback along the way here. The code review functionality is relatively new. But where I think we're headed with this is that once you do that final code review on CodeStream and approve it, you would then have the option to either create a PR on GitHub or link to an existing PR. And what we would probably do is push some summary information about the CodeStream code review up into the PR for reference. So we do intend to kind of connect things on that flow, but right now that's not the case.
Para traducir rápidamente, la pregunta es si esto es equivalente a crear, comentar y aprobar un pull request desde CodeStream. En este momento eso no es lo que sucede, pero dentro de poco tiempo sí lo será, y además nosotros creemos que podemos desconectar el code review del PR e integrarlos en el momento adecuado. Así que espero que eso conteste tu pregunta, Carlos. So we're almost about 5 minutes away from wrapping this up. We have a few more things we would like to talk about that are not part of the demo. So Dave, if you don't mind, I'd like to share as part of my screen to continue. So I'm going to continue sharing and switch over to Spanish one more time. Como comenté anteriormente, tenemos un acuerdo entre CodersLink y CodeStream para promover el producto a la red de programadores de CodersLink. Lo que queremos es resumir un poco de qué se trata esta oportunidad. Como han visto en esta presentación que ha hecho Dave, los usos de CodeStream son varios. Se pueden hacer preguntas, conectarnos con un issue tracker, hacer un code review súper rápido y ágil, documentar el código, y podemos también ayudar al equipo al ver en tiempo real en qué está trabajando cada uno. Desde el punto de vista de qué oportunidades crea esto, es un acelerador, permite trabajar más rápido en equipo. En el caso del acuerdo que tenemos con CodersLink, tenemos un soporte especial del equipo de CodeStream bilingüe, con un turnaround de 4 horas en cualquier pregunta que nos traigan. Y algo especial para los participantes, también se lo pueden comentar a sus compañeros de trabajo. Si la empresa para la que ustedes trabajan empieza a usar CodeStream, les mandaremos unas camisas y stickers y otro swag para que puedan disfrutar de la participación. Y en caso de que la empresa comience a pagar por el servicio de CodeStream, eso sucede cuando el equipo tiene más de 6 miembros. En ese caso, les mandaremos al primer creador del equipo dentro de esa empresa una tarjeta, un gift card de Amazon por 1.200 pesos. Así que si les interesa, por supuesto, utilicen el mismo mail de registro que hablamos antes en el webinar para que sepamos quién fue el creador. Y si la empresa comienza a pagar, le mandaremos al creador del equipo una tarjeta de Amazon por 1.200 pesos. Finalmente, quería simplemente comentar sobre la información que nos han dado en esta encuesta. Para que ustedes sepan, entre los participantes de este webinar, más de 2/3 de los desarrolladores que están participando aquí han trabajado como desarrollador más de 3 años y un 21% entre 1 y 3 años. Más del 70% ha estado con el empleador más de 3 meses, un 3% menos de 3 meses y un 27% está buscando trabajo. 45% de ustedes utilizan Visual Studio Code, mientras que el 18% utiliza los editores de JetBrains, el 21% Visual Studio. 60% utilizan GitHub, mientras que el 18% utilizan GitLab y un 12% Bitbucket. Y en cuanto al issue tracker, el número 1 de los participantes es Trello, con 39%, seguido de GitHub Issues, 21%, y Jira, el 12%. Y alrededor del 42% de los participantes tienen equipos de 6 o más personas. Esa es la información. Muchas gracias por haber participado en la encuesta. Thank you for participating in the polls. And with this, we're going to be wrapping this up. Here are some takeaways. Estos son algunos de los resultados, resumen de la participación en este webinar. Como dijimos, el trabajo remoto requiere nuevas herramientas y hemos diseñado CodeStream para trabajar remotamente con mayor facilidad, mejor comunicación, mejor integración y más transparencia. CodeStream les permite hacer preguntas en contexto, crear issues, code reviews más ágiles, aumentar la transparencia. Y si consiguen que sus equipos de trabajo participen en CodeStream al crear un equipo y se vuelvan equipos pagos, le daremos una tarjeta de Amazon por 1.200 pesos. Si necesitan contactarse con nosotros, mi email es claudio@codestream.com o pueden simplemente ir a Twitter @teamcodestream a hacer cualquier tipo de comentario. So, I think we are pretty much wrapped up, Dave.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate your time.
Muchísimas gracias a todos. Hasta la próxima.